Hey adventurers, so today is going to be a wrap-up for the month of August, because that was last month. So, what did we read in August? The first book that I read in August was a reread of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Audible had this available for free for a couple of days, and so during that couple of days I listened to it. I need to reread the rest of the series because I've now reread this first book twice and not continued on with the rest of the series. I do want to reread the rest of them on audio. I should review this book since I haven't reviewed it, but that'll be probably next year by the time I get to my review of it. Thoughts. Do I have any thoughts that I want to give on this book? No, I don't have any thoughts that I want to talk about on this video. Everybody knows about this book, and my thoughts really aren't anything special about it, so.
I have like 5 books.
Okay, let's do another one. Next one that I finished was the last book that is published in the Rune Lords series by David Farland. This is Chaos Bound. This is book 8 in the series. Me and Nico from Nico's Book Reviews had been reading one book a month for this series, and we finished up what is published. The 9th book may or may not ever be published, and that's sad because the author died. But great series, very, very underrated for sure. This book does not follow Palion's story anymore. This follows Benisman's story, and kind of gets him caught up to the point that, let's see, so books 6 and 7, and then this book 8 follows the timeline of books 6 and 7, but follows it from, it's not Benisman, that's the wrong character. This is Borenson, that's the right character. So it follows Borenson's storyline from the events, or during the timeline of the events of books 6 and 7. There we go. I liked it. I think that this series needs a lot more readers because it's great.
I finished The Shadows of Self by Brandon Sanderson. This is book 2 in the second era of Mistborn, so kind of book 5-ish. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Kind of book 5 in the Mistborn series. Saga. Anyhow, I really liked it. I liked the first one a little bit better. I really liked the alloy of law and the way that the story progressed. This one was very much set in a mystery format of what's going on, who's gonna be the bad guy. It was, and to be honest, I didn't love that. I'm hit or miss with mystery novels, and while I like the world and I really like the characters, I wasn't expecting to follow a mystery because it was so different from the other types of stories I've personally read from Brandon Sanderson. That being said, once again, I like the characters, I like the world a lot, and I love the way that he incorporates politics and the politics of the world into his story. He just makes it seem very believable.
Next books that I read, I'll talk about them both at the same time, kind of, because they're both part of the same series, is book 5 of Wheel of Time, which is The Fires of Heaven, and book 6 of Wheel of Time, which is Lord of Chaos. I've had a pretty interesting relationship with Wheel of Time in that I liked book 1. I didn't like book 2 as much. It was fine. I didn't like it as much. I liked book 3 a little bit better than book 2, and I didn't like book 4. At least for the first third of it, I could not stand it. And then eventually I finally got the audiobook so I could just blow through the book and try and get through it so that I could see if I was actually interested in continuing the story. It ended decent, 4 ended decently, but it's not my favorite by any means. Book 5 I liked quite a bit better, but it's very much felt like there was a lot more adult content than was necessary. It wasn't graphic, and it wasn't like a major part of the book or anything like that, but there was more than I felt like it was necessary, and it was definitely more than any other book in the series, and that took my enjoyment down a little bit, but the story was actually good. I was actually interested. The female characters weren't nearly as frustrating as they have been, which is a bonus because when half the characters that you're following, half the chapters are from female perspectives, from the perspectives of the female characters, and they're horrible characters. It gets tiring, so I'm glad that they weren't as bad. We didn't see enough of, in fact, I don't think we saw any of Perrin in book 5, and that was sad because I like Perrin's story. Book 6, again, I actually really liked book 6. Is probably, I think I probably liked it better than book 1, so that means it's the one that I've enjoyed the most, and it had a really good balance of all the characters that it was following, and by good balance, I mean that it followed our 3 main guys, Matt, Rand, and Perrin, or Rand, Matt, and Perrin, and we didn't have so much focus on the girls, which is unfortunate that that's what's making me enjoy the books more, but it is. Also, the story I thought was a good progression of the story. It's actually getting somewhere, continuing the progress. We're dealing with the aftermath of the events of Book 5, which it's good to see. Yeah, so I'm enjoying the story at this point as of Book 6, so yeah.
I also read The Butcher Baker Candlestick Taker by Patricia Meredith. I read most of this earlier this year, and then I just picked it up and finished it this month. I was not expecting the murderer to be who the murderer was, so that definitely caught me off guard, and there were some really cool scenes in this last part of the book that really made the title make sense, and I just overall was visually very appealing. I think that Patricia does a really interesting job of her characters, how they each embody very specific character traits. Usually several, but there's usually one thing about them that you can always notice, which is really neat because when you're writing dialogue, you can pick up on it based on that. So that was one thing I really liked about this book.
The next one that I finished was A Touch of Light by Thiago Abdallah. This was a reread for me. This is one that I've been needing to reread for a while, but I wanted to wait to reread it until after I'd read A Prelude to Ashes, which is the prequel novella. And so during July I read that novella, and so then in August I reread A Touch of Light. This was so that I could actually go into the second book in the series, which is A Shade of Madness, and know what's going on, because as much as I enjoyed it on my first read, there was a lot of politics and a lot of things that were going on in the story that I didn't remember or didn't get. And so I needed the reread to have a refresher and to understand the story a lot more. And I'm happy to say that I enjoyed the book just as much the second time around, and now I have a better understanding of what's going on in the world. And that's really helpful. So I enjoyed Touch of Light quite a bit.
I also read The Endurance by Alfred Lansing. This is a nonfiction about the whole endurance trip. I talked about reading a book called, it was about the Endurance, but it was about the expedition to find the sunken Endurance. And approaching that book several months ago, I didn't realize that was the book. So being able to finally jump into the actual story that I meant to read about the Endurance was really fun. I was reading it in a hard copy, and I really enjoyed the hard copy. I had a harder time enjoying the audiobook, which is what I ended up finishing it with, which I think is really interesting that some books you just enjoy more.
Yeah.
It was the stakes were high throughout the whole thing, and my interest was constantly piqued. Even though I knew the end of the story, I was still wondering, is it going to happen? How are they going to make it? And this was a true story, so that's just really fascinating to see.
The next book that I finished was Crystal Gunslinger, The Obsidian Outlaws by Oliver Laws. And this is a self-published fantasy book. The author reached out to me, asked if I wanted to read it, or if I would be willing to read and review his book. So he sent me the audiobook for it. I get to audiobooks a lot sooner than I get to physical books most of the time, just because I sit at work and can listen to audiobooks all day long, whereas I can't sit at work and read physical books all day long. So I listened to that one. The world is fantastic. It's one of the most unique fantasy worlds that I've come across. It's the location of the world that we're in is very crystalline. Everything is crystalline. All the monsters or bugs or insects or animals or whatever, they're all encased in a crystalline armor, and it makes them very hard to kill. They've been mutated by a event that happened earlier in the history of the world, and so now they've got like a crystal carapace and everything like that, and it makes them really hard to kill, really hard to fight. But the sand is like little shards of crystal and all that kind of stuff, and just the whole world is extremely interesting and very vivid world building. The story is about a gunslinger, a crystal gunslinger, meaning he has a gun made out of crystal that can fire certain types of ammunition that can then actually penetrate the armor of these monsters, and he basically is hires himself out to like caravans or whatever to act as protection, long-range protection. And the story follows this crystal gunslinger character as it starts out following him along this caravan, but then he gets wrapped into a greater storyline, and as most fantasy books do, it becomes a more epic fantasy story, but it's also very much like a Western fantasy, and I really tend to enjoy a lot of those sometimes. So it's really cool to the combination of storytelling that was used in this book was really fun. I do have a few issues with it, but I'll talk about those once I get to filming an actual review for this book, so I'll stop there.
I also read Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. This is one of those books that I've heard about for years. I didn't really know anything about it, but I got the audiobook. It's a very short read, very thought-provoking, very sad. I cried a little bit at the end. Definitely an interesting take, a very interesting perspective on the world and on what justice would look like in unique situations, and also what grace looks like in unique situations. It was very, very thought-provoking, so.
And the last book that I finished in the month of August was another reread. This is for Deathless Beast by Andrew D. Meredith. This is one that his book 3 is coming out in not very long, a month or something like that. And it's one that I read and really loved Deathless Beast about a year ago. And then I read and really loved the second book, which is called Bone Shroud. January, maybe? February, something early this year. And again, I really, really enjoyed it. And so I've been excited for the other books in the series, but I was watching a live stream that Ponderings of Pete was doing with another booktuber and Andrew D. Meredith, and they were discussing the books, and I realized there's a lot that I don't remember about this series. So I wanted to reread it as a refresher in preparation of book 3 so that I could go into book 3 knowing as much about it as I needed to truly understand the story and the politics and all the events that were going on in the story. And so I reread Deathless Beast and loved it just as much as the first time, but I picked up on a lot more of the little political details, the foreshadowing, all these kinds of things, because I know where it's going, and I could see how certain events were going to influence books 2 and probably further on books 3 and the rest of the books in the series. So I very much enjoyed Deathless Beast again, very much looking forward to continuing, well, with my reread of book 2 and then on to book 3.
I also read Legend by Marie Lu in the month of August. I had a lot of mixed feelings about this. It's a dystopian YA, and while the world is slightly different from every other dystopian YA, it feels very, very similar. And I think that's just the fact that it's dystopian. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's that same...
Yeah.
A society that's deteriorating while technology is advancing, but the people living on the government being too powerful, the people living in oppression, etc. Everything you've seen before. That was not original, even if she tweaked the way that she did some things. I also got really frustrated about halfway through the author made a choice regarding some characters that felt like a cheap shot to get to the reader's emotions, and I didn't feel prepared enough for that to be effective. And then as the book wound to the end, it was very engaging at the end, definitely kept my attention. I listened to it on audiobook, and the last hour and a half I just sat and listened to because I was that invested in the story. However, it was the same thing. I felt like she was trying to draw emotions from the reader without either preparing us enough for them or just, I don't want to give spoilers, but she used death too much in the book to draw emotions from the reader. Also a very dystopian thing to do, but it feels like cheap shot. There's other ways to draw emotions and feelings and to make us relate to a book and to feel empathetic and sympathy towards characters than by killing people around. And I also had mixed feelings about the main character. I didn't dislike her, but overall she seemed very, very powerful. If that makes sense. She's not, super powered or anything, but she is highly capable. So, lots of mixed feelings. It didn't stand out to me in regards to a world of dystopian, and unless I'm just really in the mood for this type of setting again, I probably wouldn't pick up the next book in the series. That's all that was on my list.
I think that's all that's on my list. There's several. I did read another, which one was it? It was Farmer Giles of Ham, which is another one of the short stories of Tolkien's that's in his Tales from the Perilous Realm. So I did read that one in August, and again, fantastic story, so much fun. But I'm not going to talk about that book until I've gotten through the other 2. I think I have 2 more short stories, and then On Fairy Stories, which is his big essay, one of the essays that Tolkien is extremely famous for.
Well, thank you all for watching. It was a really fun reading month for me.
Yeah, it's a good reading month for sure.
We post videos every Monday and Thursday, and we have our social medias linked in the description below.
Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys again soon. Stay warm.